People in France are preparing to vote for a new president today in the second round and final round of the election. They are choosing between the pro-European incumbent Emmanuel Macron and the far-right Marine Le Pen, who's promised to return power to the French people and challenge the authority of the European Union. Millions of undecided voters are said to have cast black ballots of abstaining from voting, including these people in Paris. For the latest, we now join SABC News correspondent Rosie Birchard, who joins us now. Great to have you on the agenda, Rosie. Have the French people started voting as yet?
The voting has commenced just in the last couple of hours, and I'm right here at a polling station in central Paris where the French are beginning to line up and fill ballot boxes with votes that will decide who gets the keys to the Élysée Palace. But as you mentioned, a big question here is turnout. In the first round of these elections 2 weeks ago, turnout was around 73%. But with many people, some people, dissatisfied with the choice they're facing between Emmanuel Macron and his far-right challenger Marine Le Pen, there is an expectation among some analysts for a higher than usual level of spoiled ballots or people simply not turning up to vote at all. Both candidates, Macron and Le Pen, have been trying to court the left vote over the last 2 weeks of campaigning, trying to take some of those votes that went to leftist candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon in the first round a couple of weeks ago. He came in third place, and while he said that his supporters should not give one single vote to Marine Le Pen, he did not explicitly endorse Emmanuel Macron, and that's why there is an expectation at least that some of his supporters simply won't show up to vote at all or will spoil their ballots. So turnout still a very big question as hours of voting still to come.
So, Rosie, now it's alleged that, undecided voters are said to have cast blank ballots of abstaining from voting. What's the latest on that?
So we don't have any figures yet on that, and we won't have any figures at all until around 8 p.m. local time when polls close, and we'll have a look at get a first glimpse of who the French have chosen. Now, when polls on Friday, when campaigning closed, suggested Emmanuel Macron had around a 10 or between 10 and 12 point lead over his challenger Marine Le Pen, the same challenger he faced in 2017 last time round. But that is a much tighter race now this year than what we saw in 2017, because last time round Emmanuel Macron secured a real landslide victory over Marine Le Pen, and it's looking much tighter this time around. But as you quite rightly noted, some voters simply dissatisfied with the choice they are facing between those two candidates and expected therefore not to vote at all or to spoil their ballots. We don't have figures on that yet, and something we will likely not know until the end of the day when polling closes and when we get that glimpse, that vision of what France has chosen, of the vision the French people have chosen for their own country.
Interestingly, Rosie, you bring up, how the numbers are doing right now, which is, why I wanted us to have this discussion around. There's analysts who keep saying that, the pool is not really that broad for people to make a decision. It's not like they have many parties or candidates that they can pick from right now. With Macron right now taking the lead, analysts have even said it would be just about people picking the devil that they know best. What is the sense that you're getting right now there on the ground?
I've been speaking to voters, and while some of them are ardently pro one candidate or the other, there are some who are dissatisfied with that choice. One voter told me he felt like he was choosing between la peste et le choléra in French, which means the lesser of two evils in English, which is a feeling which I'm sure many voters across France are experiencing. Now, they really are choosing between two radically different visions of their country and of their country in the world. You mentioned earlier that both candidates have a radically different view of how their country should work multilaterally within, for example, the European Union, within NATO, and also when it comes to relations with the wider world, including relations with African countries. So they're not just choosing on domestic policy, but also a big choice on how France will interact with the world moving forward.
Rosie, now when we look at all those factors, who's now more likely to take up the presidential seat by the looks of things?
The polls do suggest that Macron will secure a win here, but with that those question marks around voter turnout, it's still really all to play for. And Marine Le Pen, that far-right challenger, has been accusing Macron of failing to manage the cost of living crisis that many French people are experiencing as energy prices soar. And Emmanuel Macron, for his part, has accused Marine Le Pen, his challenger, of racism over her policy proposals, which include a radical clampdown on immigration and banning Muslim women from wearing headscarves. So two very different views of what the country should look like and how the country should function. So while Emmanuel Macron is, according to the latest polls, leading, we still don't have a clear view. It would be a surprise if Marine Le Pen gets in, but even if he were to secure that win that was predicted, so around 55 to 57% of the vote, that would still be a very high share of the vote for Marine Le Pen, and much higher than she secured back in 2017 when she only got around a third of the vote. So she has, according to predictions, managed to increase her vote share and attract more voters toward her camp. Emmanuel Macron, though, still expected to be the winner when polls close today at around 8 p.m. local time.
Now, Rosie, as you there, as the media itself, I'd like to find out, how has the media covered both these candidates as they head to the polls?
That's a very interesting question, because here in France, media are strictly regulated on how and when they can cover elections and campaigns. So overall, there are regulations which say that both candidates have to be given essentially equal airtime on media in France. And from Friday until now, until votes close for French media, there is a total blackout on election campaign coverage. That means if I were speaking to you on a French channel just now, I could not go into any of the details of either candidate's policy or mention anything that could be viewed as persuading voters in one direction or the other. So that's part of the regulations here in France around how it's set out that voters should be treated and how communication toward voters should be managed. Both candidates have for 2 weeks been campaigning intensely around the country, particularly Emmanuel Macron trying to visit some of those left strongholds where he feels votes might slip away and toward his far-right challenger. But overall, previous to that, it was seen that Macron was simply not getting so much into the game and was left his campaigning till very late compared to Marine Le Pen, who has been campaigning for months already, trying to curry favour and win votes for her side. So definitely an interesting media model here in France, which is a total blackout on campaign coverage from Friday until when the votes close, for fear of influencing voters in one way or another. So for example, here I was in Paris yesterday and there was simply radio silence when it comes to election coverage. And if, as I said, I were speaking to you from a French channel, I would not be able to go into all those details of the choices that are faced by French people as they head into polling centres like the one behind me.
Now, Rosie, these elections are happening, at a time where we're seeing the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. What is the stance of each candidate on this particular conflict between Russia and Ukraine?
This is a very thorny topic among candidates. So when the war in Ukraine first erupted, Emmanuel Macron had a boost in the polls as this wartime leader. He was seen as leading diplomatic efforts. He was having frequent phone calls with both President Zelensky of Ukraine and President Putin of Russia, trying to broker a ceasefire. Those efforts seem to not have borne any fruit so far, and he has taken a step back on those diplomatic efforts as he tries to concentrate his attention on the domestic scene, trying to win votes here. Now, Marine Le Pen has been criticised over ties to Russia in the past few years. She has even expressed that she believes she and Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, share some policy priorities and views of the world. Now, she has since condemned Russia over that invasion of Ukraine, but it's still a very thorny topic among these two candidates, and something, of course, a criticism levelled at Emmanuel Macron is that he has had his eyes too greatly fixed on the outside world, on that war, and on trying to improve diplomatic efforts, and not enough on the home ground and those domestic issues as people here face the fallout of the war and of the sanctions that France and other EU and G7 countries have imposed on Russia, which include that huge spike in energy prices, which is making people's lives more difficult. They are feeling it in their pockets, and that's why that initial boost Emmanuel Macron had in the polls as that wartime leader has since really fizzled out.
Wow, Rosie. And you know, we've heard talks of how Le Pen is once out of the EU if she wins this election, whilst, of course, Macron is on the other side of this. What is the sentiment on the ground as far as, of course, being a member of the EU zone?
You raise a really interesting question there, because the challenger Marine Le Pen has in fact softened her stance on the European Union, presumably to try and gather more votes. Now, in the previous election, she was advocating for France to be totally pulled out of the European Union, that big multilateral institution based in Brussels. In this time round, she has changed her stance. Instead, she wants to take more power back from Brussels and back toward Paris. And that might not sound all that radical, but what it essentially means is tearing up the rule book of the EU and rewriting some of the founding treaties. And that's why officials not so far away in Brussels will be watching this election very, very carefully, because some analysts say that a Le Pen win here and a Le Pen presidency of France would simply spell a death knell for the European Union. They predict is something that the EU as a bloc simply could not withstand. And as you quite rightly point out, Emmanuel Macron, on the entirely other end of the spectrum, very pro-European and one of the fiercest advocates of European integration. He was one of the key leaders that advocating for the EU countries to take on joint debt during the COVID-19 pandemic, something which then they did agree to do and which was a big turning point in EU policy. So two entirely different visions and views on how France should interact multilaterally and how it should behave within the European Union, and whether or not it should even be a key member of the European Union, which it is absolutely viewed as being.
Rosie, look, we have to thank you so much for your time, and you will be keeping a very close eye on the elections for us, and we'll be touching base with you a little bit later on as well in the program. Thank you so much indeed. That was the SABC News correspondent, Rosie Birchard, joining us there live.